The hum of the restaurant was a gentle, sophisticated drone, a soundscape of clinking crystal and murmured secrets. I used to love this place. The Cobalt Lounge with its low lighting that made everyone look like a star in their own private movie, its walls the color of a deep twilight sky. It was where Leo had taken me on our first official date, his hand resting on the small of my back as if he were presenting a rare treasure to the world. Now sitting across from him, the same lighting felt harsh, exposing. I'd worn the emerald green dress. The one he'd once said made my eyes look like sea glass. I'd spent an hour on my hair, coaxing it into soft, cascading waves. I'd applied my makeup with a meticulous hand, aiming for that elusive balance of effortless beauty. All for this. Our anniversary dinner. 2 years. 730 days of building a life with him, brick by fragile brick. He was distracted. His fingers tapped a restless rhythm against the stem of his wine glass, his eyes scanning the room over my shoulder instead of holding my gaze. The script we were following felt familiar, but the delivery was off. His lines about my hair, my dress, felt rehearsed. "You look beautiful, Alara," he'd said, his voice flat as if reading from a cue card. "Thank you," I'd replied, the words tasting like ash. "You don't look so bad yourself." He did. He looked devastating as always. That was the problem with Leo. He had the kind of careless beauty that made you forgive things. The sharp line of his jaw, the dark, expressive brows, the mouth that could curve into a smile that felt like a personal victory. But tonight that smile was absent. We ordered. He chose the steak rare. I chose the sea base. We made small talk about work, about a movie we'd seen last week, about his friend's disastrous golf outing. It was the pantomime of a relationship, and with every passing minute the stage felt shakier. The main course arrived, was eaten in near silence. The tension was a physical presence at our table, a ghost sipping his wine, chewing his food. I couldn't take it anymore. The pretending. The waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing it was a steel-toed boot. "Leo," I said, my voice softer than I intended, cutting through his description of a tedious client meeting. "What's going on?" He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw a flicker of the man I loved. The one who was vulnerable, a little lost. Then it was gone, replaced by a shuttered coolness. "What do you mean?" He took a sip of water, a deliberate stall. "You know what I mean. You've been a million miles away for weeks. You cancel plans. You don't answer my texts for hours. You look at me like I'm a problem you need to solve." I kept my hands folded in my lap, nails digging into my palms. I would not cry. Not here. He sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to drain the very air from between us. He set his glass down, his movements precise. "Alara, we need to be realistic." The word was a punch to the gut. Realistic. It was never a good word. It was the word people used when they were about to say something cruel and dress it up as pragmatism. Realistic about what? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, not in intimacy but in confidentiality, as if we were business partners discussing a failed venture. "About this. About us." I waited. The world had narrowed to this table, to the space between his lips forming the words and my ears receiving them. "I'm 29, he said as if it were a profound revelation. "It's time to think about the future." "Seriously." "I am thinking about the future," I whispered. "Our future." "That's just it," he said, and there it was, the condescending tone he used when he thought I was being naive. "You see this fairy tale. The house, the kids, the dog. I need to be sure I'm building that with the right person. The best possible person. The best possible person." The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. I felt something inside me begin to crack, a fine fissure spreading through the foundation of my self-worth. And I'm not the best possible person? The question was a whisper, a plea for him to take it back, to laugh and say it was a joke in terrible taste. He didn't laugh. He looked at me with a pity that was more brutal than any anger. "Alara, you're incredible. You are. But let's be honest. It's comfortable. It's easy. But is easy enough for a lifetime?" My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. For 2 years I thought easy was another word for happy. "It is," he conceded, but it was no concession at all. "But happiness isn't the only metric. There's compatibility on a deeper level. Ambition. Social standing." He waved a hand vaguely. I've just been keeping my options open. Seeing what else is out there. The fissure became a chasm. Keeping my options open. While I had been all in, building a home in his heart, he had been a tourist browsing other destinations. So, I said, my voice miraculously steady, a calm I did not feel settling over me like a shroud. What are you saying, Leo? Just say it. He met my gaze and his eyes were clear, resolved. There was no pain in them. No regret. Just cold, hard calculation. I'm saying that while I figure out what I really want, you're my backup option, Alara. A safe choice. And I'm not sure I'm a safe choice kind of man. Backup option. The words didn't just land, they detonated. They obliterated every I love you whispered in the dark, every future plan sketched on a napkin, every sacrifice I'd made, every piece of myself I'd given him. I was not his partner. I was not his love. I was Plan B. A placeholder. A consolation prize he would settle for if his grand search for the best came up empty. I looked at him, at the man whose face I had traced with my fingers, whose laugh was my favorite sound, whose body I knew as well as my own. And I saw a stranger. A handsome, hollow stranger. The tears that had been threatening did not fall. They receded, frozen solid by a cold, clear fury. I would not give him the satisfaction of my pain. I would not let him see me crumble. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my napkin on the table. I reached for my purse. My movements were fluid, calm, as if I were moving through water. Alara, he said, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He had expected tears. He had expected a scene. He had expected to be the one to walk away from this conversation, the magnanimous one letting the poor, deluded girl down gently. I stood up. The emerald green dress felt like a costume now. I looked down at him, at the man who had just reduced our love to a contingency plan. I am nobody's backup option, Leo, I said, my voice quiet but sharp as shattered glass. It carried in the hushed space between us. A few people at neighboring tables glanced over, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. He opened his mouth to speak, to retract, to explain, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned. And I walked away. Quietly. I didn't look back. I walked past the curious glances, through the opulent lounge and out into the cool night air. The door hissed shut behind me, sealing away the world where I was Alara, the backup plan. I stood on the pavement, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. The numbness began to wear off and the pain, sharp and searing, rushed in to take its place. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A tiny, defiant spark. He thought I was his safe choice. His consolation prize? I would show him just how wrong he was. The first week was a blur of acute surgical pain. It wasn't the dramatic, weeping, hair-tearing grief of movies. It was quieter, more insidious. It was waking up and for one blissful second forgetting. Then the memory would crash over me. Backup option, and it was like being plunged into ice water. The day would begin with a gasp of remembered humiliation. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a crime scene. Every corner held a ghost. The sofa where we'd spent Sundays tangled together watching old films. The kitchen where he'd taught me how to make a proper carbonara, his arms wrapped around me from behind. The bed that still smelled faintly of his cologne on his pillow. I stripped the bed, shoved the linens into a garbage bag and opened all the windows, letting the indifferent city noise wash in. My friends Chloe and Maya descended like avenging angels. They arrived with wine, greasy takeout, and a fury on my behalf that was a tangible, warming force. A backup option? Chloe had spat, her petite frame vibrating with indignation. That arrogant, entitled walking haircut. I swear to God, Alara, I'm going to key his precious car. Maya, ever the pragmatist, had simply held me while I finally, shudderingly, cried. His loss, she murmured into my hair. His catastrophic, monumental loss. They wanted details, of course. I gave them to them in flat, monotone sentences. Watching their faces contort in horror and rage was perversely comforting. It validated the sheer scale of the betrayal I felt. This wasn't a simple breakup. It was a demotion of my entire being. I did all the things you're supposed to do. I went through the motions. I went to work at the design firm, focusing on layouts and color palettes with a manic intensity that my boss, Sarah, noticed and praised. Such drive, Alara, she said, and I gave her a tight smile, not telling her it was either focus on Pantone codes or dissolve into a puddle on the floor. I went to the gym, pounding the treadmill until my lungs burned and my legs turned to jelly, trying to outrun the echo of his words. I deleted his number, blocked him on social media, and asked Chloe to be the custodian of any physical remnants of him. A hoodie, a book, a toothbrush, to dispose of as she saw fit. She did so with a ceremonial glee that involved a dumpster and a liter of cheap vodka. But the quiet moments were the worst. The shower where the water could mask the sound of my crying. The walk to the grocery store where I'd instinctively reach for his favorite brand of coffee. The silence of my phone which had once buzzed constantly with his texts. The anger was my fuel. It was cleaner than the grief, more powerful than the humiliation. I clung to it. I replayed his words in my head not to torture myself, but to fortify my resolve. Backup option. Safe choice. They became a mantra of defiance. I would not break. I would not call him. I would not let him see a single crack. About 3 weeks after the Cobalt Lounge, the text started. Not from his number, that was blocked, but from messaging apps, emails from accounts I didn't recognize. Blair, we need to talk. You can't just walk out like that. I think you misunderstood what I was saying. This is childish. Please answer. I miss you. The last one was the most galling. I miss you. He missed his backup plan. He missed the comfort, the easy affection, the ego boost of having someone waiting in the wings while he scouted for the lead role. I deleted every message without replying. Each deletion was a small act of reclamation. Then the flowers arrived. A massive, ostentatious bouquet of red roses. The most unoriginal, guilt-laden apology in floristry. The card read, "I'm sorry. Dinner was a mistake. Let me make it up to you." Oh. I stood looking at the roses, their velvety petals and cloying scent making me nauseous. They weren't a peace offering, they were a leash. He was trying to reel me back in, to restore me to my designated place in his life now that he'd had a taste of being alone. The sheer arrogance took my breath away. I carried the vase to the lobby of my apartment building and left it on the front desk. "Feel free to take these home, Jerry," I said to the doorman. "Or give them to your wife. They're not for me." Jerry, a kind man in his 60s, gave me a knowing look. "Trouble in paradise?" "Paradise was a mirage, Jerry," I said, and the truth of it settled deep in my bones. The final stage of his unraveling was the attempted ambush. He knew my schedule. He knew I usually worked late on Thursdays. I was leaving the office, exhausted but feeling a sliver of pride for having survived another week, when I saw him leaning against the building across the street. My heart didn't flutter. Clenched hard like a fist. He looked terrible. His usually impeccable clothes were rumpled, his hair was disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes. The sight gave me no pleasure, only a cold, distant pity. This wasn't about missing me, it was about his plan falling apart. He pushed off the wall and crossed the street, his steps hurried. "Elara. Please. Just talk to me for 5 minutes." I kept walking, my pace steady. "I have nothing to say to you, Leo." He fell into step beside me. "Well, I have things to say to you. I was an idiot. A complete and utter fool. What I said, it came out all wrong." "Did it?" I asked, my eyes fixed on the subway entrance ahead. It seemed pretty clear to me. "I was scared," he said, his voice rising with a desperation I'd never heard before. "Scared of commitment, scared of the future. I sabotaged it. I know I did. But you can't throw away 2 years because of one bad conversation." I stopped then, turning to face him fully. The streetlights cast harsh shadows on his face, making him look older, harder. "It wasn't a bad conversation, Leo. It was a truth I was too blind to see for 2 years. You didn't sabotage something that was real. You simply stated the terms of our arrangement. I was your backup. I finally heard you. Now I'm acting accordingly." He reached for my arm. I flinched back as if burned. The hurt in his eyes was genuine this time. "Good. Don't touch me," I said, my voice low and venomous. "Elara, I love you," he pleaded, the words that had once meant everything now meaning nothing. "I love you and I know you love me. This is just pride. Don't let your pride ruin what we have." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Pride? You think this is about pride? This is about self-respect, Leo. A concept you clearly know nothing about. You don't get to love me. You don't get to say those words. You don't get to keep me on a shelf like a toy you can play with when you're bored. The arrangement is over." I saw the moment it truly hit him. The moment he realized I was not coming back. that his safe choice had chosen herself. His face crumpled, the desperation turning into a raw, stunned devastation. "So that's it," he whispered. "You're just done." I looked at the man I had once thought I would spend my life with. I looked at the wreckage of what we had been. And I felt nothing but a vast, echoing stillness. "I was done the moment you called me your backup option," I said. "You just didn't notice I'd left." I turned and walked down the subway steps, leaving him standing on the sidewalk. I didn't look back. This time I knew he was watching. And for the first time since that night at the Cobalt Lounge, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't pain or anger. It was freedom. Freedom, I quickly learned, was not a single triumphant state of being. It was a daily practice. It was waking up and consciously choosing not to let Leo's ghost dictate my day. It was a series of small, deliberate acts of reclamation. The first was my apartment. I could no longer live in a museum of a dead relationship. One Saturday, fueled by a potent mix of caffeine and resolve, I embarked on a great purge. I rearranged the furniture, shifting the sofa to the opposite wall, turning the entire geography of my living space on its head. It was disorienting for a day, and then it was liberating. This was no longer the space Leo and I shared. It was mine. Wholly, completely mine. I painted the accent wall a bold terracotta red, a color he would have hated, calling it too loud. I filled the place with plants, ferns, snake plants, a trailing pot hose, bringing in messy, vibrant life. I took down the minimalist black and white art prints he'd chosen and replaced them with my own colorful, slightly chaotic watercolors and photographs from a trip to Italy I'd taken before I met him. Next was my body. The gym sessions morphed from punishment into power. I stopped running from my pain and started lifting weights, feeling my muscles strain and strengthen. I joined a yoga class, learning to find stillness in my own mind, to breathe through discomfort. I wasn't trying to achieve a certain look for anyone else. I was building a fortress for myself. My body was becoming a testament to my own resilience, not an object for someone else's approval or disapproval. Work became my sanctuary. Where I had once seen a job, I now saw a career. I stopped playing it safe with my designs. I started pitching bolder, more unconventional concepts to clients. To my shock, they loved it. Sarah pulled me into her office. "Alara, I don't know what's gotten into you these last couple of months, but whatever it is, bottle it. This work is exceptional." It was the anger I wanted to say. It was the sheer, unadulterated force of not being someone's second choice. But I just smiled and said, "Thank you. I'm feeling inspired." My social life, which had shrunk to the circumference of Leo's circle, exploded back into color. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected. I said yes to every invitation. A gallery opening, a weekend hiking trip, a disastrous pottery class with Chloe and Maya that left us covered in clay and aching with laughter. I learned to be Alara, the friend, the colleague, the daughter again. Not just Alara, Leo's girlfriend. The half of a whole, was becoming a wonderfully complex, complete individual. And then there was dating. The very idea made my stomach clench. The thought of another man's hands on me, another man's voice in my ear, felt like a betrayal of what? A betrayal of a lie? A betrayal of a man who saw me as a contingency plan? The logic was flawed, but the fear was real. Chloe, ever the instigator, created a dating profile for me on a popular app. "We're not looking for Prince Charming," she declared, snatching my phone back as I tried to delete it. "We're looking for practice, for fun, for a reminder that there is a whole world of men out there who aren't emotionally stunted chess players." The first date was a disaster. A nice enough man who spent 2 hours talking about his cryptocurrency portfolio. The second was better. We had a pleasant conversation about books and parted with a friendly handshake. The third was a hilarious mismatch. A free spirit who suggested we quit our jobs and follow his band on tour. I went home alone after each one, but I went home smiling. It was like physical therapy for my heart. It was stiff, it was awkward, but it was working. I was remembering how to connect, how to flirt, how to be seen as a person, not a position. Through it all, Leo's attempts at contact became a distant, pathetic buzzing. A letter arrived, pages of scrawled apologies and self-flagellation. I read it once, then fed it to my shredder. He tried to follow my private Instagram account, the one I used for my art. I blocked him without a second thought. He was like a sailor sending signals to a shore that had long since drifted away. About 4 months after the breakup, I was in a funky little jazz bar with Maya. The air was thick with the smell of old wood, whiskey, and soulful music. I was wearing a crimson jumpsuit I'd bought on a whim, feeling powerful and a little bit dangerous. I was telling her about my latest design project, my hands animated, a genuine, unforced laugh bubbling out of me. And then I saw him. Not Leo. Another him. He was sitting at the bar, alone, a notebook open in front of him, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He wasn't my usual type, which was to say he wasn't Leo. Where Leo was all sharp, polished edges and calculated charm, this man was warm. He had broad shoulders that strained against the soft fabric of his dark sweater, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners as he listened to the musician on stage. His hair was a messy, sandy brown, and he had the focused, contented air of someone perfectly comfortable in their own skin. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. It was just a casual glance around the room, but there was a flicker of something, acknowledgement, a spark of curiosity. I looked away first, a faint heat rising to my cheeks. "See something you like?" Maya murmured, following my gaze. "No," I said too quickly, taking a sip of my drink. "Just people watching." But I found my eyes drifting back to him throughout the night. He wasn't trying to catch my eye again, he was just present. He'd scribble in his notebook, tap his finger in time with the music, occasionally share a quiet word with the bartender. He was entirely unself-conscious, a world away from the performative masculinity I was used to. When Maya and I got up to leave, I felt a strange magnetic pull. As we passed the bar, my purse somehow clumsily caught the edge of his notebook, sending it and his pencil clattering to the floor. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, bending down at the same time he did. We bumped heads lightly and a laugh escaped us both. Up close, his eyes were a warm hazel green. "No harm done," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. He gathered his things, his hand brushing against mine as he handed me my fallen purse. A simple, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt through me, not of nervous anxiety but of pure, clean energy. "I'm such a klutz," I said, straightening up. "A welcome interruption," he replied with an easy smile. It was getting a little too serious in here. He gestured to his notebook where I could see musical staffs and scribbled lyrics. "You're a musician?" I asked. "A songwriter. Trying to be, anyway." "Ben," he said, offering his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, warm. "Ilara. Ilara," he repeated, and my name sounded different on his lips. Not a label, not a title. A melody. "That's a beautiful name." Maya was waiting by the door, giving me a wide-eyed, encouraging look. "Well, Ben the songwriter," I said, feeling a boldness I hadn't felt in years. "Good luck with your serious work." "Thanks," he said, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Maybe I'll see you around, Ilara." I walked out into the cool night air, my heart beating a swift, happy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't the frantic, anxious pounding I'd get around Leo. It was the steady, exciting drum of a new beginning. For the first time, the thought of someone new didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a promise. A promise I was making to myself. I didn't expect to see Ben again. The city was a vast, swirling ocean, and our encounter in the jazz bar felt like a single beautifully captured moment in a bottle. Precious but likely to remain isolated. I tucked the memory of his warm smile and the way he'd said my name into a quiet corner of my mind, a small, sweet secret to counterbalance the bitterness of the past. But the universe, it seemed, had a different plan. A week later, Sarah assigned me a new project. Branding and packaging for a small, independent record label that was making waves with its curated, soulful artists. "It's called Vesper Records," she said, sliding the brief across my desk. "The owner is a bit of a maverick, but he's got a great eye for talent. His name is Ben Carter. Meeting is tomorrow at 10 at their studio." My heart did a little flip. Ben. Couldn't be the same one, could it? A record label owner? He'd said he was a songwriter. It was possible. Probable, even in this city of interconnected creative circles. A nervous flutter started in my stomach. This was no longer a chance encounter in a dimly lit bar. This was professional. I had to be sharp, capable, not the klutzy woman who spilled his notebook. The Vesper Records studio was located in a converted warehouse in a trendy, industrial part of the city. Exposed brick, high ceilings, the faint, comforting smell of old vinyl and coffee. I was shown into a spacious office cluttered with guitars, album artwork and piles of records. And there he was standing by a large window talking on the phone. Ben Carter. He was dressed more formally than at the bar, in dark jeans and a crisp button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows revealing strong forearms. He saw me and held up a finger, his expression shifting from businesslike to one of genuine surprise and, unless I was imagining it, pleasure. He finished his call quickly. "Elara," he said, that same warm rumble in his voice. "Well, this is a happy coincidence." "Mr. Carter," I said, extending my hand, determined to keep it professional. He took it, his grip just as firm as I remembered. "Please, it's Ben. And I have to say, your company comes highly recommended, but I'm even more intrigued now." The meeting was exhilarating. We talked about his vision for Vesper. Authentic, raw music that told a story. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a passionate custodian of art. He spoke about his artists with a paternal pride, his eyes lighting up when he described a particular lyric or a unique vocal texture. I presented my initial ideas, my nerves melting away as I fell into the familiar language of design. I talked about typography that echoed the grit of the city, color palettes inspired by a twilight sky, packaging that felt like a tangible piece of the music itself. He listened intently, leaning forward in his chair, asking insightful questions. He didn't just say, "I like that," or "I don't like that." He engaged. He understood the why behind the design. "You get it," he said finally, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "You actually get it. Most designers just want to make something slick and pretty. You want to make something that means something." The praise washed over me, warm and validating. This was a different kind of admiration than I was used to. Leo's compliments had always felt like evaluations. "You look beautiful tonight, Elara. That was a smart thing you said." Ben's felt like a collaboration, an acknowledgement of a shared wavelength. As the meeting wrapped up, he walked me to the door. "So, Elara from the design firm who also frequents dodgy jazz bars," he said, a playful glint in his eye. "I'd say this calls for a celebration. Or at least a coffee to discuss the next steps. Strictly professional, of course." I knew it was a line. A charming, utterly transparent line. And for the first time in a long time I wanted to be caught. "Of course," I said, matching his tone. "Strictly professional." Our professional coffee, the next day, stretched into 2 hours. We talked about everything and nothing. Our favorite books, our terrible taste in childhood movies, our shared love for the ocean. He told me about growing up in a musical family, about leaving a stable corporate job to start Vesper. I found myself telling him about my art, my watercolors, things I rarely shared with anyone. He listened as if my words were the most important thing he'd hear all day. There was no gamesmanship. No calculated pauses before replying to a text. It was easy. It was fun. Our first official date was a walk through the botanical gardens. It was a crisp, sunny afternoon, and we wandered for hours among the blooming flowers and towering trees. He didn't try to impress me with expensive dinners or grandiose gestures. He pointed out a particularly stubborn squirrel, made up ridiculous backstories for the other visitors, and at one point, simply stopped to close his eyes and feel the sun on his face. "You're very present, aren't you?" I observed. He opened his eyes and looked at me. "It's a privilege to be present, don't you think? To actually be here in this moment and not somewhere else in your head." It was such a simple statement, but it struck a deep chord. I had spent so much of my time with Leo being somewhere else, trying to anticipate his moods, decipher his silences, mold myself into the woman I thought he wanted. But then I was just here. Elara. And that was enough. He kissed me for the first time at the end of that walk, standing by my car. It wasn't a demanding kiss or a practiced one. It was soft, questioning, a gentle promise. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since you sent my notebook flying," he murmured. I laughed, a light, happy sound. "Took you long enough." Being with Ben was like learning a new, beautiful language. It was unfamiliar, sometimes awkward, but endlessly fascinating. He was steady where Leo had been volatile. He was open where Leo had been closed off. He saw me as a whole person with my own dreams and my own scars, and he wasn't intimidated by them. He was curious. I didn't tell him about Leo. Not the full story. He knew there had been someone, that it had ended badly. That was all. There was no space for Leo's ghost in this new sun-dappled world we were building. For the first time since the night at the Cobalt Lounge, the memory of Leo's words didn't feel like a brand on my skin. They felt like an old, faded scar. A reminder of a wound that had healed stronger than before. I was happy. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was what it was supposed to feel like. This was what it meant to be someone's first choice. To be the melody, not the backup singer. Happiness, I was discovering, was not a fragile soap bubble, liable to pop at the slightest disturbance. It was more like a well-built ship, able to weather storms. The storm in this case arrived in the form of an industry party. Vesper Records was throwing a launch party for one of their flagship artists, and as the lead designer on the project, my presence was requested. It was to be a glamorous affair at a rooftop venue downtown, all glittering city views and chic, important people. A part of me, the part that was still healing, felt a twist of anxiety. These were Leo's natural habitats, the world of finance and high-level networking. The chances of our paths crossing were, for the first time, statistically significant. "You're not going alone," Ben had said firmly when he'd handed me the embossed invitation. It wasn't a question. "You're my date." In every sense of the word. The way he said it, possessive and proud, sent a thrill through me. He wasn't hiding me, he was presenting me. It was a world of difference. The night of the party, I stood in front of my mirror, scrutinizing my reflection. I'd chosen a dress of deep sapphire blue, a color that felt both powerful and serene. It was elegant, backless, and made me feel like I was wearing a piece of the night sky. My hair was swept up in a loose, sophisticated knot. I looked successful. I looked confident. I looked over him. When Ben saw me, he let out a soft, sharp breath. "Wow," he said, his eyes dark with appreciation. "Alara, you are breathtaking." He came up behind me, his hands resting lightly on my bare shoulders. He met my gaze in the mirror. "Ready to go conquer the world?" "Ready," I said, and I meant it. The party was everything I'd imagined. Loud, vibrant, pulsing with energy. The rooftop was strung with fairy lights, and the view of the city skyline was staggering. Ben naturally was pulled in a dozen directions the moment we arrived. He introduced me to everyone as Alara, the brilliant designer behind the entire campaign. I was met with handshakes and genuine interest, not the polite, dismissive glances I'd sometimes received as Leo's +1. I was in my element, talking shop with a music video director, laughing with a rising indie singer, feeling the thrum of the music in my bones. I was holding a glass of champagne, listening to Ben animatedly describe the recording process of the new album to a small group, when I felt it, a familiar cold prickle on the back of my neck. The unsettling sensation of being watched. I casually turned my head, scanning the crowd. And then I saw him. Leo. He was standing near the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, talking to a man I recognized as a venture capitalist. But he wasn't listening to a word the man was saying. His entire focus was locked on me. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, a very beautiful, very untouchable ghost. He was thinner, the sharp angles of his face more pronounced. He still wore his expensive suit with an air of entitlement, but it seemed to hang on him differently, as if the confidence that had once filled it out had deflated. His eyes, dark and intense, were wide, tracing the line of my dress, the easy way I stood at Ben's side, the smile that was on my lips. Our eyes met across the crowded rooftop. For a moment, the noise of the party faded into a dull roar. I saw the journey of emotions on his face. The initial shock morphed into confusion, then into a dawning, ugly realization, and finally settled into a raw, gut-wrenching hurt. He had expected to see me broken, pining, waiting. He had not expected this vision of radiant, unassailable happiness. I didn't look away. I held his gaze, my own expression calm, neutral, perhaps with the faintest hint of polite curiosity, as if trying to place where I might know him from. It was the most powerful thing I could have done. I gave him nothing. Not a flicker of recognition, not a tremor of old pain. Just the placid surface of a lake that had long since stilled. He flinched, actually flinched, as if I'd struck him. He looked away first, turning back to his companion with a strained, distracted nod. Ben, attuned to me in a way that still surprised me, leaned down. "Everything okay?" he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. I turned to him, my smile returning, real and effortless. Everything's perfect, I said, and I meant it. I looped my arm through his. Just saw someone from a past life. Nothing to worry about. He searched my face for a moment, saw the genuine peace there and smiled back, pressing a kiss to my temple. Hey. Ready to get out of here soon? I'm starting to miss having you to myself. I thought you'd never ask. We stayed for another half hour, a deliberate, graceful exit strategy. I was aware of Leo's gaze burning into me the entire time, but I never looked his way again. I was a sun and he was a planet whose gravity I had escaped. I laughed, I talked, I let my hand rest on Ben's arm, I leaned into his side. I performed happiness, and the beautiful, terrifying thing was, it wasn't a performance. It was my reality. As we made our way towards the exit, we had to pass near the bar. Leo detached himself from his group, stepping directly into our path. He was unsteady, his eyes glassy with too much drink and too much emotion. "Elara," he said, his voice hoarse. Ben stopped, his posture shifting subtly, protectively. He looked from Leo's anguished face to my calm one. "Leo," I said, my tone polite, distant, the way you'd address a casual acquaintance. "Hello. I didn't know you'd be here." He blinked, stunned by the civility, the utter lack of feeling. I had to see you. To talk to you. "This really isn't the time or place," I said smoothly. "Ben, this is Leo. Leo, this is my boyfriend, Ben Carter." The word boyfriend landed on Leo like a physical blow. He looked at Ben, at the easy way his hand rested on the small of my back, at the quiet confidence in his stance. He saw a man who was not threatened by him, a man who had what he had so carelessly thrown away. "Boyfriend," Leo repeated, the word a bitter taste in his mouth. "Nice to meet you," Ben said, his voice cool but polite. He didn't offer his hand. Leo ignored him, his desperate eyes fixed on me. "Elara, please. Just 5 minutes." I looked at him, the ghost of my past crumbling before my eyes. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. Just a vast, clean emptiness where he used to be. "I have nothing to say to you, Leo," I said, my voice soft but final. "I hope you have a good evening." I took Ben's hand and we walked away, leaving Leo standing alone in the middle of the party, a monument to his own regret. We stepped into the elevator, the doors hissed shut and the silent, plush box ascended, carrying us away from the past and into our future. Ben squeezed my hand. "You were amazing," he said quietly. I leaned my head against his shoulder, the adrenaline finally receding, leaving only a profound sense of peace. "No," I whispered. "I'm just finally free." The encounter at the party should have been the end of it. A full stop. A final, dramatic period at the end of the sentence that was my relationship with Leo. But for him it seemed, it was merely a semicolon. A pause before a desperate, flailing attempt to restart a story that had already reached its conclusion. The attempts at contact resumed, but they were different now. More frantic. Less apologetic and more demanding. The texts and emails were no longer about misunderstanding or fear. They were about betrayal. "How could you move on so quickly? You're with that musician? Was he waiting in the wings the whole time? You've made your point, Elara. You've humiliated me. Now can we please talk like adults?" I deleted them all, a small, weary smile on my face. The irony was so thick you could taste it. Waiting in the wings. He was projecting his own modus operandi onto me. He couldn't conceive that my happiness was organic, that it had grown in the fertile ground he had abandoned. He needed to believe there was another man, a rival, because the alternative, that I had simply healed and found something better without him, was an unbearable blow to his ego. Ben was a gentleman about it. He never pried, never demanded the sordid details. But he saw the notifications on my phone, the occasional tension in my shoulders when a message from an unknown number popped up. "Do you want me to talk to him?" he asked one evening as we were cooking dinner in my kitchen, the air fragrant with garlic and rosemary. The offer was so simple, so protective, it made my heart ache. "No," I said, chopping a tomato with focused precision. "No, this is my battle. And it's already won. He just doesn't know how to lay down his sword." Ben came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Hey. But the offer stands. No one gets to harass my girlfriend." My girlfriend. The words still sent a thrill through me. They felt like a title of honor, not ownership. A few days later, the final, most brazen attempt came. It was a Friday, and Ben and I had plans to try a new Italian bistro that had just opened a few blocks from my apartment. It was a quaint, intimate place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in Chianti bottles. It was our kind of place, unpretentious and full of soul. We were seated at a small table in the back, our knees touching under the table. We were leaning in, sharing a story, our world contained within the soft circle of candlelight. Ben was laughing at something I'd said, his hand covering mine on the table, his thumb stroking my knuckles. I felt utterly, completely cherished. And then the air shifted. I looked up and my blood ran cold. Leo was standing just inside the doorway of the restaurant, his eyes scanning the room. He looked wrecked. His coat was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and his face was pale and drawn. He'd clearly been drinking. His gaze landed on our table, on our joined hands, on the intimate scene we made. He started walking towards us, his steps unsteady but determined. "Ben," I said quietly, my grip tightening on his hand. Ben followed my gaze. His expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "It's okay. Just ignore him." But ignoring him was no longer an option. Leo stopped at our table, looming over us, his presence casting a dark shadow over our candlelit bubble. The smell of whiskey wafted from him. "So this is it?" he slurred, his voice loud enough to draw glances from neighboring tables. "This is where you replace me? In some cheap tourist trap pasta joint?" Ben started to stand, his body tense. I placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Leo, you need to leave," I said, my voice low and steady, though my heart was hammering. "You are making a scene." "A scene?" he barked, a bitter laugh. "You think this is a scene? You paraded your new boy toy in front of me at that party. You flaunt your little happiness. Did you think I wouldn't find out where you were? That I wouldn't come and see for myself what's so much better than what we had?" His eyes were wild, desperate. This wasn't the cool, calculating man from the Cobalt Lounge. This was a raw nerve, exposed and thrashing. "What we had was a lie," I said, standing up now, meeting his gaze squarely. "I would not be intimidated in my own life. You made that perfectly clear. What I have now is real. And it is none of your business. Now for the last time, leave us alone." He swayed on his feet, his eyes filling with a pathetic, self-pitying moisture. "You loved me," he whispered, the words a broken plea. "You told me you loved me." "I loved a man who didn't exist," I replied, the truth of it crystallizing in that moment. "I loved the idea of you. The real you called me his backup option. The real you doesn't get to be here now." He looked from my resolute face to Ben's protective, stony one. He saw no crack, no doorway back in. He saw a united front. The devastation that crumpled his features was total. It was the final, utter collapse of his worldview, where he was the sun and I was a loyal planet. He opened his mouth to say something else, but the restaurant manager was suddenly there, a firm hand on his arm. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing our other guests." Leo looked at the manager, then back at me, a broken man being escorted out of a narrative he could no longer control. He didn't fight it. He allowed himself to be led away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The restaurant was silent for a moment, then the gentle hum of conversation slowly started up again. I sat down, my legs feeling weak. Ben was immediately beside me, his arm around me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I looked at him, at the love and the steadiness in his eyes, and I realized I was more than okay. The ghost had been faced and he had dissolved into nothing. "I'm fine," I said, and I truly was. I think that was the end." Ben cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "Good. Because our story is just getting started." He leaned in and kissed me right there in the middle of the restaurant, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of promise and a future bright and unshadowed. It was the final, perfect note in the crescendo of my revenge. Not a kiss of vengeance, but a kiss of reclamation. A kiss that said, "I am here, I am loved, and I am never going back." The past was finally, irrevocably dead. Peace after the storm is a profound and quiet thing. In the weeks that followed Leo's final, pathetic implosion at the restaurant, a deep and settled calm descended over my life. The frantic texts and emails stopped. The sense of being watched evaporated. It was over. The war I hadn't known I was fighting was won, and the victory was not in his humiliation, but in my own profound sense of liberation. My life with Ben unfolded like a beautiful, predictable melody. We fell into a comfortable rhythm of work, shared dinners, lazy weekends, and a growing, deepening love that felt as natural as breathing. He moved a few of his things into my apartment. A guitar in the corner, a stack of records by the player, his favorite brand of coffee next to mine. It wasn't an invasion. It was an integration. Our lives were weaving together, creating a tapestry richer and more colorful than anything I could have imagined alone. One Saturday we were browsing a flea market, a favorite weekend pastime. He was sifting through a crate of old vinyl and I was admiring a stall of antique jewelry. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Chloe. "You will not believe the tea I just heard." I smiled. Chloe's tea was usually deliciously dramatic. "Go on," I typed back. "So I ran into Stephanie from Leo's office, remember her? Anyway, she said Leo took a sudden leave of absence. Apparently he's been a mess since the breakup. Completely fell apart. Word is he's been passed over for a big promotion because he's not presenting a stable leadership image. Karma is a beautiful, beautiful bitch." I read the message twice. There was no schadenfreude, no triumphant thrill. Just a distant, quiet acknowledgement. It was like hearing news about a character in a book I'd finished long ago. His suffering was no longer my concern. His consequences were his own to bear. I had truly finally moved on. "Find anything good?" Ben asked, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. I showed him the phone. "Just some gossip from a past life," I said. He read the message, his brow furrowing slightly. "Does that bother you?" I looked up at him, at the faint worry in his kind eyes, and I felt a surge of love so powerful it stole my breath. "No," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "It doesn't bother me at all. It has nothing to do with me. My life is right here." He kissed the top of my head, his relief palpable. "Good. Now look what I found." He held up a pristine, original pressing of a Joni Mitchell album. "Our collection is officially legendary. Our collection. Our life. Our future." Later that evening we were at his studio. He was tinkering with a new song and I was curled up on the large, comfortable sofa with a sketchbook, working on a series of watercolors inspired by his music. It was a scene of such domestic creative harmony it felt almost unreal. He strummed a chord progression, hummed a line, scribbled it down. He did this for a while, lost in his world. Then he stopped and looked over at me. "You know," he said, his voice soft in the quiet room, "I never really believed in that stuff. Love at first sight. Destiny. All that." I looked up from my sketchbook, a smile playing on my lips. "No. What do you believe in?" "I believe in work. In connection. In showing up." He set his guitar down carefully and came over to the sofa, kneeling in front of me. He took my hands in his gaze intense and full of emotion. "But then you walked into that jazz bar. And you sent my notebook flying. And I looked at you and it was like the first chord of a song I'd been trying to write my whole life." My breath hitched. "Ben. I love you, Ilara," he said, the words simple, direct, and utterly devastating in their sincerity. "I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world in colors I never even knew existed. I love the art you make and the life you're building. I love you." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was it. This was the unveiling. Not just of his love for me, but of a truth I had been too afraid to speak. "I love you too, Ben," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "So much. You make me feel seen. Not as an option or a prize but as a partner. As myself." He reached into his pocket and my heart stopped. But he didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out a small old-fashioned key. "This is the key to this studio," he said, placing it in my palm and closing my fingers over it. "My sanctuary. My messy, chaotic, creative heart. I want you to have it. I want you to have all of it. I'm not asking you to move in with me right now. I'm just asking you to always have a key. To always know that wherever I am, you have a home." I looked down at the cool, heavy brass key in my hand. It was more meaningful than any piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of trust, of shared space, of a future built together, brick by brick. It was an invitation to a life, not a demand. A sob escaped me and I threw my arms around his neck, burying my face in his shoulder. "Yes," I choked out. "Yes." He held me tight, laughing softly. "Is that a yes to the key?" It's a yes to everything, I said, pulling back to look at him, my tears streaking my face. It's a yes to you and to us and to this life. It's the easiest yes I've ever said. He kissed me then, a deep, passionate kiss that held all the promise of the future in it. It was a kiss that sealed the deal, that closed the door on the past and threw open all the windows to tomorrow. Later, as we lay tangled together on the sofa, the city lights twinkling outside the large studio windows, I thought about the journey. The pain of the Cobalt Lounge, the long hard work of rebuilding, the fear of opening my heart again. It had all led here. To this man. To this key. To this profound, unwavering certainty. Leo had said I was his backup option. Walking away had been the hardest and best thing I had ever done. Because it led me to the man for whom I was and always would be the only option. A year. Felt like a lifetime in the blink of an eye. The sharp, shattered pieces of the woman I had been had not just been glued back together. They had been melted down in the crucible of my pain and recast into something stronger, more beautiful, and entirely my own. The scars were still there, but they were no longer wounds. They were a testament to my survival. Ben and I were celebrating our 1-year anniversary. Not of our first date, but of the night at the jazz bar. The night our stories collided. It's the night my life truly began, he'd insisted. The night a beautiful chaos named Elara literally crashed into my world. He'd planned the entire evening as a surprise, a sweet, secretive smile on his face for days. He blindfolded me as we got into a taxi, his hand holding mine tightly. Trust me, he'd whispered. I did. Implicitly. When the blindfold came off, I was standing in the middle of the Vesper Records studio. But it was transformed. The clutter was gone. The space was filled with hundreds of candles, their flickering light reflecting off the soundproofing panels, creating the illusion of a starry sky. In the center of the room was a single small table set for two. A violinist played softly in the corner. Ben, I gasped, my hands flying to my mouth. It's magical. It's for you, he said simply, his eyes shining in the candlelight. All of it. Always for you. We ate a catered meal that was somehow both exquisite and comfortable, just like our relationship. We talked, we laughed, we danced slowly to the violin music, my head resting on his chest, listening to the steady, sure beat of his heart. I have one more surprise, he said, leading me to the sofa. He picked up his guitar. I wrote you a song. He began to play. The melody was simple, haunting, and beautiful. It spoke of lonely nights and crowded rooms, of searching for something you can't name. And then the lyrics shifted, the chords brightening as he sang about a flash of emerald green, a collision of notebooks, a laugh that changed everything. He sang about my sea glass eyes, my resilient spirit, the way my hand felt in his. He sang about finding home in the most unexpected place. By the time the last note faded, I was crying, silent, happy tears streaming down my face. It was the most profound gift anyone had ever given me. He hadn't bought me jewelry. He had written me a piece of his soul. He set the guitar down and came to kneel in front of me just as he had the night he gave me the key. My heart, which had been so full a moment before, suddenly felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. This felt different. This felt monumental. Elara, he began, his voice thick with emotion. He took both my hands in his. A year ago you walked into my life and rewrote every song I'd ever known. You showed me what real strength looks like. You showed me what it means to love without reservation, to build a life on a foundation of trust and respect. You are my best friend, my muse, my partner in all things. He reached into his pocket and this time he did pull out a ring. A simple, stunning band with a single perfect emerald-cut diamond that caught the candlelight and threw 1,000 rainbows around the room. My life was a melody before you, he said, his eyes locked on mine, shining with unshed tears. But you, my love, you are the harmony. You are the song. Will you marry me? Will you make me the happiest man in the world and be my wife? There was no hesitation. No shadow of the past. No fear. There was only him and me and this perfect crystalline moment of certainty. Yes, I said, my voice clear and strong, a joyful laugh bubbling up through the tears. Yes, Ben. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto my finger. A perfect fit, and then he stood, pulling me into his arms and spinning me around, our laughter echoing in the candlelit studio. The violinist began to play a joyous, soaring tune. It was a scene from a fairy tale, but it was my life. My real, messy, beautiful life. We eventually left the studio giddy and wrapped up in each other, to go for a walk along the river to talk about our future, to just be in the glorious bubble of our engagement. The night was clear and cool, the city lights painting shimmering paths on the dark water. We stopped at our favorite spot, a quiet bench overlooking the skyline. Ben's arms were around me from behind, his chin resting on my head. I leaned back against him, looking at the diamond on my finger, a symbol of a promise that was already being kept every single day. And that's when I saw him. One last time. Leo was walking on the path across the river, alone. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, his shoulders hunched against the chill. He looked smaller, diminished, a silhouette of the man he once was. He stopped and looked out at the water, and for a moment his profile was etched against the city lights, a picture of solitude. Then, as if feeling a pull, his head turned. His gaze traveled across the water and landed on us. On Ben holding me. On my left hand resting on Ben's arm, the new ring catching the light. On my face, tilted up to look at my fiancé, undoubtedly glowing with a happiness so profound it was almost palpable. I didn't look away. I met his gaze across the dark expanse of water. There were no words, no gestures. Just a look. A final, silent transmission. He saw it all. The love. The promise. The ring. The future that was so brightly, undeniably mine. I saw the exact moment the last vestige of hope, the last stubborn ember of his possession, died in his eyes. It wasn't a crumble this time, it was a quiet extinction. A final acceptance. He had lost. Not to another man, but to the simple, unassailable truth that I had found a love that valued me, and in doing so, I had become someone he could never have again. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was a surrender. Then he turned, shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I felt Ben's arms tighten around me. "You okay?" he murmured into my hair. I turned in his arms, wrapping my own around his neck, leaning up to kiss him. It was a kiss of possession, of joy, of a future so bright it hurt to look at. "I've never been better," I whispered against his lips. "I'm with the man I love. The man who loves me. The man who always made me feel like I was his only option." Ben smiled, that slow, easy smile that still made my knees weak. "Elara," he said, his voice full of a love so deep it felt like coming home. "You were never an option. You were the only choice." And as I stood there in his arms, the city glittering around us, the ghost of my past finally laid to rest, I knew he was right. Walking away from being a backup plan wasn't just an act of revenge. It was the first and most important step toward finding the love that was always meant to be mine. It was the beginning of my story. The end.